Some other terrorism experts are saying that he may be the only person who has the kind of organization to orchestrate this kind of attack. Where do you? Right.
And he certainly has the wherewithal to do that.
Now, the ultimate go-ahead for any sort of strike, when it comes, if it is determined fairly clearly that we have figured out who is responsible for this, how does the chain of command work? I mean, who gives the go-ahead, and where does it have to sort of, does it originate from the top, from the commander-in-chief, the president?
Right. Only the president can order military action, and then he sends the order to the Secretary of Defense, who transmits it to the field commander. But only the president has that authority under our Constitution.
Now, when you say he transmits it to the field commander, does he speak to Donald Rumsfeld?
Yeah, the president.
And then it goes to the Joint Chiefs, or how exactly does it go down the...
Normally what the president would do is he would sign the order or direct the Secretary of Defense to execute whatever the contingency plan would be. The Secretary of Defense would sign the order, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff would transmit it through military channels to the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific, the Commander-in-Chief of our Atlantic forces, or whoever is the area commander. The Commander-in-Chief of the Central Command, for example, would have responsibility for that area. That was General Schwarzkopf's job during the Gulf War. He was the commander of the Central Command.
Mr. Corbett's John Scott with just a general question. I mean, what are our options? We lobbed some cruise missiles at Osama bin Laden years ago. That didn't seem to have much of an effect. What kinds of operations, just in broad strokes, can we consider here?
Well, I think you have to stop these before these people get into the country, get onto your planes, or get these weapons, and it has to be done by the international community. As powerful as we are, the United States cannot do this by itself, because without working with the rest of the world, we can't get these people, and that's the frustrating thing. You saw what happened when we sent the FBI to Aden to investigate what happened with the coal. We didn't get the cooperation. Unfortunately, the world has to deal with this, and the United States needs to take the lead in getting the world to establish guidelines about dealing with these terrorists. Because if they can do it here, they can do it any place.
Let's say we can trace the perpetrators of this to some country somewhere in the world. Would you suggest to the president, if you were still advising him, would you suggest some kind of an armed invasion to go in and get whoever's responsible?
Yeah, I would suggest going in and getting them and working through the local authorities if you could. I mean, because a lot of our friends around the world will be more than happy to help us. And so if the person is in country X, you work with the law enforcement and armed forces there to get them out and bring them to justice.
Larry Korb, we thank you very much, of the Council on Foreign Relations, former Assistant Secretary of Defense under the Reagan administration.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you once again. We take it now to correspondent Rick Leventhal. Perhaps the heroes of this day will be those who have been performing rescue on those who are trapped inside. Rick Leventhal is with one of those individuals right now. Rick?
Countless rescues performed by Bill Quick here with the New York City Fire Department. I know you were on vacation and this happens. Take us through what your first call, and what you did after that.
I drove in. I live in Long Beach. I drove in my car. I could see the smoke coming from the World Trade Center. I have a radio in my car. I can hear everything that's going on. Just mayhem. First plane hit. Second plane hit. The first time I got there, I ran up to the building, and a police officer said, "I got people trapped down in the subway." So I went into the subway, went downstairs, got people up. People are bleeding, screaming, crying. And I just said, just come upstairs, go to your left, just keep going to your left. Just find the ambulance, go to your left, go to your left. Within 2 to 3 minutes after that, the first collapse happened of the building. I don't know which building it was. It came down. I was outside. I ran behind a pillar. I got down on the floor. I covered in my coat. I didn't have a mask at the time. I covered my coat, and I was trying to survive. And it was total. So I looked at him. I said, "No, you're not burnt. You're just covered with soot, hot soot, and everything like that." After that, he went on his way. I went and got a mask. I went back in the building, and I went searching for more people, and we found out that there was nobody else left down the subway.
And I'm here to update you all on the activities of the federal government in response to this morning's attacks on our country. As you heard from President Bush a short time ago, the federal government is acting to help local communities with search and rescue and emergency management operations, to take all appropriate precautions to protect our citizens and to identify those responsible for these despicable attacks on the American people. While some federal buildings have been evacuated for security reasons and to protect our workers, your federal government continues to function effectively. We have a federal emergency response plan, and at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it. We began to implement it immediately after the first attack in New York this morning. We contacted American forces and embassies throughout the world and placed them on high alert. The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe. They have also secured members of the National Security Team, the President's Cabinet, and senior staff. As you know, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida when the first attack occurred this morning. Air Force One has now landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and the President is in a secure location. He is in continuous communication with the Vice President and key members of his cabinet and national security team. Vice President Cheney and our National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in a secure facility at the White House. I have just come from there. The Secretary of Transportation and other members of our White House senior staff are gathered at a command center there, and we are coordinating with other branches of our federal government from his trip to South America. President Bush is conducting a meeting of the National Security Council as we speak. They are meeting President Bush from his location and other members from different locations in Washington and other locations. As many of you have been reporting, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport. International flights were diverted to alternate locations outside of the United States. Transportation Secretary Mineta has directed the Federal Aviation Administration to suspend operations until at least noon tomorrow. So no airline flights will operate until at least then and until the FAA announces that operations will be resumed. Secretary Mineta has also issued orders controlling the movement of all vessels in United States navigable waters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated 8 urban search and rescue task forces in New York, and 4 of these highly trained teams are at work here in Washington at the Pentagon. Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively. While the markets closed today because of the situation in Manhattan, the United States financial system has continued to operate. Banks have been open all day. The Federal Reserve has operated regularly and continuously. The Department of Health and Human Services has mobilized medical personnel and supplies to provide help to local authorities who are working so diligently to respond and try to help the victims of these terrible attacks. President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible for these despicable attacks. The Department of Justice is setting up a hotline for families who fear that their relatives may have been victims of one of these attacks, and we will be announcing that telephone number shortly. Our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today, and no one should doubt America's resolve. President Bush and all our country's leaders thank the many Americans who are helping with rescue and relief efforts. We ask our fellow Americans for your prayers for the victims, for their families, for the rescue workers, and for our country. Thank you all very much, and we will continue to update you as information is available and confirmed.
Karen, how long will the president stay in Nebraska?
So Karen Hughes apparently taking no questions. Karen Hughes, the senior advisor to the president, giving us an update on the status of some of the most senior people in Washington. The president is most recently landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. She said the president is at a secure location, but she did not necessarily suggest that he is on the base itself. One believes he probably still is. The vice president and the national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in the White House in a secure location, probably that basement bunker there.
It is not very often that this nation is brought to a standstill, but on today, it has happened. Many people here in New York City, in Washington, D.C., all over the country, staring at their televisions, unable to believe what they are seeing happening before them. You see it here on the corner of 48th Street and 6th Avenue in New York City, outside the Fox News Channel headquarters. We have seen this sight in many locations. People just simply in shock at what they're seeing. Who could have thought that an attack of this magnitude would happen in the United States of America? We have had officials planning for such an attack for some time, but many ordinary citizens thought that something like this could never actually happen. So much security in place, so many times that defense officials and others have war-gamed this out and planned for an attack. But on this day, it has happened. No one able to figure out why, particularly September 11th, the year 2001. One person has mentioned that it was supposed to be tomorrow that an associate of Osama bin Laden was due to be sentenced in New York. And others have mentioned that they believe Osama bin Laden is perhaps the only terrorist with the kind of organization who could plan something this massive and this deadly. The United States government not confirming anything of the kind. The Afghan government, which has been accused of for some years of harboring Osama bin Laden, rushing to say that they have no knowledge of this and they condemn it. However, they have for years not given Osama bin Laden up to the United States, despite repeated requests from Washington. They are also saying that they do not believe Osama bin Laden is capable of this. There may be many in Washington who believe otherwise at this hour. We're waiting for more briefings to come in. Some planning at the Department of Defense. As you know, Secretary Rumsfeld is still there at this hour. Others with officials in New York City. We are going to bring those to you just as soon as they happen. They're going to be happening just sort of suddenly, and as they do, we're going to bring them to you here on the Fox News Channel.
There are a great number of survivors you can see being carted away. This from the lower Manhattan area, where our Rick Leventhal has been doing a great job of reporting all day. Rick is back with us now live and safe, we're happy to say. Rick, what's the latest there?
Well, John, one of the things that you did not hear from firefighter Bill Quick, who I was just speaking with a short time ago, is I asked him, after Karen Hughes' news conference began and we had to break away, I asked him about the number of rescue workers on the ground when that building collapsed, when the first tower collapsed. And he said, in fact, there were hundreds of rescue workers at the base of the building, tending to people who had been injured by falling debris from when the planes hit, tending to people who had been hurt by rubble and were bleeding and dazed and wounded and disoriented, trying to help those people when that tower collapsed. And there is a growing concern that hundreds, possibly hundreds.
Video footage we want to show you.
I hope I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. It's incredible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go find people who need help, because I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Can I get a toot? I'm just getting a couple of clean breaths. That's good. Okay. Back to you.
It is a terrifying scene. We are told by those who operate the World Trade Center that this morning, shortly before 9 a.m. Eastern Time, when the first plane slammed into one of the towers, that the building was at full capacity, meaning that somewhere around 50,000 people were inside those two towers. We don't know a number yet of how many people were hurt. There you see the second plane slamming into the second tower. It did not take long for a chain reaction of events, including a massive fire inside each tower, to occur. And then one tower collapsed, than the other. Now we know that part of the World Trade Center complex, Building 7, is also on fire at this hour. It is in danger of collapse. We have a correspondent there. We will be checking with him. There is also a tremendous disaster all around Lower Manhattan. 10,000 or more emergency rescue personnel have been brought in. They've been called in. All taxi cabs in New York City have been commandeered to ferry rescue workers down to that area. At the same time, the Navy has dispatched a number of ships to New York Harbor to help with the rescue operation. Hospital emergency rooms around the city and beyond completely in chaos.
We are going to go momentarily to a former ambassador to NATO, but before we go to Ambassador Robert Hunter, let me introduce on the phone Kelly Quill, who was an eyewitness to both Kelly Coyle. Kelly Coyle. You saw both planes hit both towers, and you saw both towers come down. Tell me about it.
I went to work this morning. I worked for Solomon Smith Barney, and we're located at 7 World Trade, and I'm on the 43rd floor. And we were just sitting there today, and we saw the first plane hit the building. And at that point, I really did not know what was going on. It didn't look like an accident because it looked like it was a direct, that they were aiming it right at the World Trade Center. But then there seemed to be like explosions, so people didn't really know. There was a lot of debris hitting the windows. People panicked, but they stayed put. And originally I thought that we stayed put for about 5 minutes, and then the second attack hit. But now I find out that it was actually 18 minutes, so it's funny, how time flies.
Okay, now Kelly, plane number 1 hits, plane number 2 hits, and then there's a lot of fire. And
mass hysteria, people running down the stairs, just trying to get out.
Kelly, I apologize for breaking in. Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, now speaking about the terrorist attacks. Let us go there now.
Assistance at any time. The government of Israel has declared a day of mourning tomorrow as we bow our heads and share in the sorrow of the American people. תודה רבה לכם.
All right, it was very brief, but you got the essential message there from Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Basically saying it stands with the United States and in a show of solidarity tomorrow.
We keep hearing people say we've got to figure out who did this. We've got to figure out who did this, and they said that after the Oklahoma City bombing, and it turned out to be something much different than what people expected. In this case, it doesn't seem like there's going to be a Tim McVeigh behind this, does it? It does seem to be a either state-sponsored or quasi-state-sponsored act of terrorism, doesn't it?
Well, the marking so far is that this was a foreign group, but it could very well have been Osama bin Laden, with money from various places, but it didn't necessarily require the state to do this. I think the essential thing that's happened with this tragedy today is whoever did it didn't realize who they're dealing with. This is a day that will live in infamy. This is like another Pearl Harbor, in which we're already seeing today the extraordinary way in which the American people across the country, and certainly here in Washington, certainly in New York, have been pulling together. And I think whoever did this is going to regret this dearly.
Okay, but what does that mean? I mean, we pull together as a country, we stand united, we stand tall, we go on, we do all that. But there is a tight-jawed anger and demand for something serious to be done. What do you think that will be?
And I think it will have to be done. One reason I think the government have been so cautious today was precisely what you said that happened in Oklahoma City, where a lot of people got it wrong. A lot of people had to be involved in what happened today. Going through 4 airports and hijacking the planes, being able to direct them the way they were, choosing planes that were full of fuel for the greatest impact. This will come out if we have any intelligence capability at all, and at that point, just as the Japanese found after Pearl Harbor, the United States will have to use whatever power it can to bring these people to justice or to take direct military action against them. There's no more ifs, ands, or buts about that. And I think the nation, this government, opposition, everybody together, I think, is united on that point. And those who did it are going to be brought to justice.
Ambassador Robert Hunter, former ambassador to NATO, now with the RAND Corporation, thanks very much for your view. Let me go back to Linda Vesser. We have a live picture from down near World Trade Center number 7, I think, Linda.
And just a reminder, President Bush is due to address the nation live via national television a little bit later this evening. With us once again, former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger. Mr. Eagleburger, we heard just a short while ago, Shimon Peres of Israel said that they had no advance warning. They have an extensive intelligence network. They had no specific advance warning that this kind of an attack was coming. The United States has the NSA, it has the CIA, it has the DIA, and the FBI. How is it that these sophisticated agencies could not get advance warning of an attack?
Oh, I think there are any number of reasons for that. First of all, this clearly is a sophisticated operation, very sophisticated, very professional. I suspect that it was kept in the hands of very few people and that they are extremely dedicated, and they simply didn't leak. I shouldn't say it's simple. It's not. Under normal circumstances, you would have thought that we would have been able to get some intelligence on it. But if they are really as competent as they seem to be, and as careful as they seem to have been, I could understand why we couldn't get information on it. I don't like that fact, but I at the same time can't feel terribly upset because we didn't, because in cases like this, often we don't get these things.
You know, we were listening to James Baker, your colleague, and
Right.
He was saying earlier that he thought that perhaps the United States government needed to revisit this law, I believe it is, that does not allow the United States to assassinate an individual, even if the United States has definitive information that a certain individual had something to do with a massive loss of life.
I must say to you, ma'am, I have believed for a very long time that it was wrong. It was during President Ford's administration, I think, when the executive order was issued. I have thought for a very long time that ought to be eliminated. We ought to be able to carry out the kinds of activities necessary under really circumstances like this. We ought to be able to do what's necessary to protect our country now.
Well, I may
it ought
be
to
getting...
be very carefully constructed so that it can't happen all the time, but I very much believe we ought to change it.
Well, I may be getting a little ahead of myself here, but how exactly would that be reversed if there is a decision that executive order really no longer applies in this current terrorist world?
I think the answer to that is if the president issued the executive order, another president can issue a second executive order removing the first one. It doesn't take that much, frankly.
You know, Mr. Eagleburger,
yeah.
I thought that maybe it's not something the United States has the ability to monitor in real time, but looking back, isn't essentially every phone call on the planet recorded by some national security agency? Can't we go back and look at who Osama bin Laden or any of these people were talking to anytime they were talking
Well, I'm sure that if...
Do we have that capability?
I think as a matter of... They certainly have the capability, and to go back and look at it, I suspect, is going on right now. But, you know, again, here we are, thousands and thousands of phone calls. It's not easy to pick up, but it's a lot easier to pick it up after the fact than before it. There's no question about that.
So I guess what I'm getting at is that even if we don't have the real-time intelligence, or we have not spent the money necessary to have, as you put it earlier, the messy business of spies, do we have the capability of going back in sort of a forensic fashion and figuring out who did what?
We may well have. Again, it's going to depend to a great degree on how closed-mouthed these people were. If they were as professional as they seem to be, it may well be that there is no evidence. But on the other hand, there is also no question that you can go back and not quickly necessarily, but you can very often establish precisely the kind of information you're looking for
Mr.
when you know what's already happened, but you can't do it beforehand.
Mr. Eagleburger, hold on just a second. Richard Shelby, the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, is speaking now in Washington. Let's listen in.
Families that were lost today, and we should be, but we've got to realize that this is a wake-up call for America. A lot of us have been talking about terrorism, counterterrorism, how to deal with it. We live in an open society, and we're not going to live in a bunker, and we shouldn't. And I'll see what goes on in this meeting in here, but I think the bottom line is we were basically caught flat-footed, and we've lost a lot of people, and that's sad.
Who's responsible, Senator?
Well, I'm not here to blame anybody. I'm just here to say that we've got to do better.
Based on what you were told today by First Lieutenant and based on your briefings in the past, do you think it was been monitored?
I can't say that, but a lot of things point to it. Was either I would think it would either be Osama bin Laden's cell or some other cell similar to it or kin to it or spin-off from it. But I can't say that yet. Maybe later today there'll be some more specific information.
Insofar as some of the terrorist groups have made a point of criticizing American policy towards Israel, is it...
Let me interrupt right here. Richard Shelby talking. Building 7, the World Trade Center number 7, has collapsed. It was expected to go, and it finally has. So that is 3 buildings in New York City that have collapsed in today's terror attacks.
We should clarify that Building 7 was not struck with anything. This is actually part of a chain reaction that began when the 2 towers of the World Trade Center were hit by those 2 commercial airliners caught on fire and then collapsed. So this is part of the chain reaction simply as it continued to sort of devastate buildings around the area in Lower Manhattan. Once again, this is basically a state of emergency in Lower Manhattan as they try to rush rescue personnel to the scene.
And down there, standing beside our camera, is our correspondent David Lee Miller. David, fill us in. David Lee Miller, can you hear me?
Let's go, please. Back it up. Let's go.
All right, they're telling our correspondent David Lee Miller to get out. So as we watch the Trade Center building number 7 collapsing, and the police are moving the camera crews, get out, get out, get out. Let me there's still more live pictures of this. Let me speak to Richard Suppmeyer, who joins us. He is a frequent guest on Neil Cavuto's show and is in one of the buildings down there. Richard, is that your building, the one that just collapsed?
No, we're in 59 Maiden Lane, which is right opposite the Federal Reserve.
And you had to walk down, what, 32 flights?
Right.
Could you tell, because we've all been trying to figure out, of the 50,000 people who work in those 2 towers that collapsed, could you look out on the street and make a judgment as to whether a significant number of them managed to get out?
It's hard to believe that a significant number of them could have gotten out. Maybe in the 18 minutes between crashes, maybe some of them got out of the second
How long did
building.
it take you to walk down 32 flights?
I took it slow, obviously, and when I got down, I took a nice big drink of water, and I thanked God that I'm alive, particularly since we almost moved to that building a few months ago.
There goes the building. There's a picture of the building collapsing just moments ago. We finally got the tape in. That is Trade Center building number 7. It was involved, I guess you would call it collateral damage here, that from the original collapse and fires of the 2 Trade Center towers, and moments ago our fire department here in New York lost it, and it collapsed. Richard, I'm just trying to get a couple of, how long did it take you to walk down 32 flights? We're trying to judge how long it would have taken somebody on the 80th floor of the tower to get out of the building before it collapsed.
Now, a lot of people passed me because I'm a big guy, so I wanted to walk slowly going down 32 flights. It took me about 20 minutes because they already had the doors locked down on where I had to get out.
Richard, also, if I can jump in, just so people understand who was in the World Trade Center, there are some small offices that nobody might recognize, but then again, there are also companies that a lot of people recognize. I mean, from everywhere from Avis, car rental, to Lehman Brothers, the investment house, to Delta Airlines. Who else?
Well, Morgan Stanley has quite a few floors, like 10%, and Cantor Fitzgerald is on the upper part of the first building that was hit, and that's an interdealer broker with screened prices, and I've known them for 30 years. I'm going to be very sad when I see the list of people who didn't make it out of the building. It's going to be the next time I break tears, I think, with this situation.
Richard, we're talking about 10,000 people as just a rough guess.
It's got to be more than that.
You think? Okay, Richard Setmeyer, thanks a lot. Hold on just a second. Let me go now to Senator Chuck Hagel, who has been conferring today in D.C. about this horrible day of infamy, perhaps not just a day of infamy, but the day of infamy. Senator Hagel, has the State Department got any clue what happened today?
Nobody does, John, except to say this was a very sophisticated effort. I think we all recognize that. Resources, intelligence, people that came together in a very precise project and effort to do this terrible, terrible terrorist act. That's what we do know. Now, we will unfold this and we will pull it apart and we will get the facts. And when we get those facts, there will be punishment. But right now what we must do is what we are doing, in fact, is securing our country and all our national security interests, helping those we need to help, pray for the families. And
A report from correspondent David Lee Miller on the collapse of building number 7 of the World Trade Center. David? David Lee Miller.
Chaotic. Just a few moments ago, World Trade Center building number 7 collapsed. Earlier, we had been warned by firefighting sources that the building was in danger of collapse. Engineers were on the scene. They say the building was structurally very weak. It was in flames. It was on fire since this morning. And just a few moments ago, the entire building gave way. From my vantage point on Reed Street in Lower Manhattan, it appears the building fell south, which is the opposite direction that the Twin Towers fell. This had been predicted throughout the afternoon, and it had prevented a number of emergency workers from getting close to the scene. Nevertheless, up until a few moments ago, we saw a virtual parade of emergency vehicles on their way downtown. Suddenly and without warning, the building gave way. Everything came to a standstill. A huge plume of smoke went into the air and began to barrel northerly in our direction. The police asked us to move our live truck and our cameras and lights and equipment, and we, the authorities, literally fled about a block and a half north to stay out of harm's way, and we're watching the smoke slowly continue to move in our direction, not knowing if this is going to cause any further injuries. I believe that building, as I said, was empty at this time because authorities knew that it was very, very much in danger of collapse, and things went the way that the authorities feared. Back to you.
And David, just to clarify, that building number 7 is much, much smaller than the 2 towers that we saw collapsing this morning.
That's absolutely right. I don't know how many floors it is, but in comparison to the World Trade Towers, excuse me here, it looks almost like a mid-rise building, but it was an important building to the city of New York. It had a number of important city offices, including an emergency operations center of some type, and it's going to make the cleanup down here yet even more difficult. Because to put all this in perspective, Linda, as you and I both know, what we have here really is a city. You've got 50,000 people that work in these buildings every day. Many Americans don't live in communities that are that big, and the damage here is just devastating.
Now, David, before I let you go, back to Senator Hagel, just quickly, has there been any progress in getting into the area of the 2 towers to start looking for people in there?
Yeah, I asked one of the firefighters that, and we're not allowed close to the actual tower site, what was once the World Trade Towers. I'm told that they're trying at this hour to get to those who may be trapped in the rubble, but it is extremely, extremely difficult. So to what, if any extent, they're able to pull people out of the rubble at this time, we really don't know for sure, but I can tell you that it's going to be a very, very long night here.
All right, David Lee Miller with us live from New York City. And back to Senator Chuck Hagel. Senator Hagel, you probably have access to more detailed information about what happened this morning than we do. Have you been briefed on what the FAA knew about hijackings before the actual attacks on the building? Because we've heard that the FAA had early information of a hijacking in progress.
I am not aware of any of that specific information. We've been briefed, some of us, throughout the day. I just spoke to the Acting Secretary of State, Rich Armitage, a couple of minutes ago. As you know, Secretary Powell is on his way back from Latin America. And so we've gotten periodic updates, but no one has been able to put all the pieces yet together. We will, but not yet.
Senator Hagel, you know, I hate to sound like I'm obsessing on this, but I just think that we can't lose sight of it for a moment. The huge number of people that undoubtedly died here. Won't there be an almost unstoppable cry for a pound, if not a ton, of flesh over this?
John, no nation can allow this kind of cowardly terrorist act of this enormity, this immensity, as you mentioned, to go unpunished. We will get the facts. We will be sure of those facts. And when we have those facts, we will do something about it. Now, one of the things that might come out of this, John, is a new coalition of the civilized world focusing, putting the resources on dealing with terrorism. As great a power as the United States is, as we found out today, we can't do this alone. We need all the civilized world with us. And we need to deal with this. This issue, terrorism, is the scourge of our time.
Senator Chuck Hagel, thanks very much for the latest from your vantage point. Let's go now to Rear Admiral Eric McVaden of the Institute for Policy Analysis, who joins us from Washington. Mr. McVaden, we all want to know who, how, why, and what to do about it. Where can you start?
Well, I think you identified just exactly the problem. Of course, a lot of people are asking, so how do we strike back? How do we both defend the U.S.? And by the way, I don't think we've seen F-16s and F-15s flying over the Washington area like this ever in my life. Concerted effort among all of the civilized world there. But I think we have an intelligence challenge now at two levels. First, just exactly as you described it, to say who did it, but then to be able to determine whether there are going to be future attacks or what the future threats are.
Well, Admiral, there's two approaches to this. You figure out who, and then you say, do we take the cuddly approach? Why are they mad at us, and how can we make them happy with us? Or do we take the opposite approach and say, we hit them hard, make them so frightened of ever doing such a thing again that it doesn't happen? What's the approach?
Well, I don't know what the approach is because you've identified the dilemma exactly. And, you know, let me describe it in terms that the Chinese often do with me in North Korea. And so what you should do is be able to get along with the North Koreans better and you'd eliminate the threat. Well, that's much easier said than done. I think it's a balance between the two and that we'll have to cope with that for all the time that I can foresee.
Admiral Linda Vester with you as well. Just a question about what it means that the Pentagon and actually, as we understand, naval forces along the entire East Coast are under threat con Delta. Can you explain?
Well, that's simply going to the highest state of alert so that we attempt to both be ready to cope with anything, but also for force protection means, and so that we ensure that we do not get yet another very unpleasant surprise.
Right. So we have multiple Navy ships now dispatched, some of them to the New York Harbor to help with the rescue. How much training do those aboard those ships have for this kind of incident?
Well, of course, I've heard that there might be a hospital ship that's going, and so that would certainly have something there. But yes, people are trained to cope with emergencies and so forth, but I guess I take some pleasure, if there could be any such thing derived in this kind of situation, to know that once again the country looks around and says, where are our aircraft carriers? So it makes me proud of my years in the U.S. Navy.
Yeah.
All right, Rear Admiral Eric McVaden, thanks very much for joining us. You may want to stay on the line and listen to this. We're going now to our senior correspondent in Washington, Rita Cosby, who has new information on the possible Osama bin Laden connection. Rita.
Yeah, John, I just got off the phone with two law enforcement sources, and they are telling me that they are getting strong indications that Osama bin Laden and his organization of Al-Qaeda, which is based in Afghanistan, along with bin Laden, may be behind this attack. What's interesting is that they're saying, my sources, that they have strong indicators. They would not say specifically what those indicators are, but they're saying it's much more than just speculation, when a lot of people have believed that bin Laden may have been tied just because he had the financial resources to do this, the capability, the widespread network all over the globe. But my sources are telling me that in addition to just the obvious, that they are getting some severe and very strong indicators pointing in that direction. They're saying that at this point it is not enough to be, to go right out and say that they definitely did that, but they're saying that they are almost to the point where they are almost certain that they are behind this attack.
Rita, if I can ask you a question about this, we don't know any details, but we're all making a fairly informed estimate that that it was not the scheduled pilot that flew these planes into the trade towers or the Pentagon. Who in Osama bin Laden's world can train people to fly 757s?
Well, there are actually a number of them, frighteningly, and in fact, intelligence sources were telling me earlier today that they actually have a couple of training grounds right there in Afghanistan where they are training suicide bombers for planes, i.e. 737s, 757s, 767s, also private planes, and also other types of bombing attacks. And of course, intelligence sources firmly believe he's been behind the USS Cole attack. That was where a small boat pulled up alongside the USS Cole and it exploded. But they said that they have gotten some intelligence information that he was indeed training people on some American commercial jetliners, and that he was capable of doing this. And in fact, I remember around the time of the Millennium strikes, remember all the preparations that were being made and the strikes that were thwarted by U.S. officials at that point, there was in the mix the possibility that there might be multiple hijackings on. You were reporting right around the time of the possible Millennium strikes that they saw increased activity around his camps, where he was sending out some of his leaders, the ones right below him, to sort of delegate to other surrogates around the globe. What happens with Osama bin Laden, his network is so widespread that normally it's about 4 or 5, sometimes 6 or 7 layers away from him are the actual individuals who carry on. His followers released a videotape of Osama bin Laden saying that he's going to hit them where it hurts, and he talked about hitting targets in U.S. also and in Israel. So there were some indications that he was going to go after his followers, go after his enemies and go after them with a vengeance. But now I'm being told, John, from law enforcement sources that it is much more than just sort of the sense that he was capable of carrying out this attack, that he had obviously the financial resources, certainly the infrastructure around the globe, but that they are getting strong indicators pointing in that direction. Right now, not 100%, but getting strong indicators pointing there.
Rita Cosby, if you would stand by, we have more information coming in. We've gotten word that there's a convoy of military vehicles in Washington, D.C., passing through the section of Washington known as Georgetown, working their way west, headed towards Georgetown. No indication as to what exactly they're planning to do, but that is coming in, being confirmed. Also, President Bush is due to speak to the nation a little bit later tonight. At this moment, he is in the air, heading back to Washington from Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska. That is where he stopped. He touched down. He held a National Security Council meeting.
Terrorists, as and still doesn't know if his brother is dead or alive.
So I've been on the phone since like 10 o'clock this morning, and it's just no calls getting through.
In Orange County, Jackie Calloway, Local 6.
The attack shocking many and scaring many more. A terrorist attack that struck terror in the hearts of Americans everywhere. Here's Local 6 reporter Kim Covarrubias.
In downtown Orlando, a shockwave of disbelief ripples through the streets.
It's unbelievable. It's like a horrible dream.
It's probably the worst thing that's happened in the United States since Pearl Harbor.
Veteran John Votaw was on a heavy cruiser the day Pearl Harbor was bombed and says today's terrorist attack can't compare.
Oh, there's no doubt, but what this is much worse.
Anywhere with a TV, people are watching and wondering who they might know that could be involved.
Our good friend and our business partner, his office is in the 80th floor of that building. He was just about an hour late this morning, and it was fortunate that he was an hour late.
And as the morning passed, the situation got worse.
What's next? You know, you have to start to prepare yourself. What's next? Who do you know in the building?
It is an attack that nobody wants to believe.
It's disgusting, it really is, on such a nice country like you've got here.
At St. James Cathedral, some are seeking sanctity the only way they know how.
So, you know, you want to pray for everybody's safety. This is, you know, there's no words that you can use. It scares you.
Now, we have seen this attack from so many angles, but this one is particularly devastating. If you've seen it, we want to show you another look at the exclusive home video of the blasts.
Mike Holfeld is in the Breaking News Center now with those pictures. Mike.
Well, certainly we've been watching the video from all different angles on all different networks today, but we suspect that this is the most compelling, and that's why, as Bob indicated to you, we're going to this again. So let's roll this videotape. CBS exclusive here. Watch very closely. You see the flames and the thick billowing smoke coming from that northern tower. Now watch carefully. You're going to actually see the there, right there, smashing into the southern tower. No question about it. As the assessment we're getting from the expert is, that was intentional. Terrorism at its very worst. We've also learned now that the 7th tower has come down. We have information out of New York, and we have that video to show you. Watch very slowly the smoke, and you'll see the building just giving way, the heat, the incredible power that brought it down, and there it goes down. Number 7 World Trade Center, adjacent to the Twin Towers that collapsed this morning, heavily damaged in the morning attack. By late afternoon, it had also fallen. The Twin Towers, of course, came down in a thunderous roar within an hour and a half of this morning's attacks. There again, the exclusive video, the thick, billowing smoke. New Yorkers and Americans across the country waking up to this, and then the powerful impact on the Southern Tower, the exclusive video from CBS. America will never forget. Also, we're hearing from the Pentagon now, as you look at those pictures, the law enforcement officials say the nation's military headquarters was hit by American Airlines Flight 77. It was seized while carrying 64 people from Washington to Los Angeles. That's the very latest from the Breaking News Center. Jackie, Bob, I'm going to send it back to you.
Absolutely unbelievable pictures.
Both pictures, from that one where you can see the plane hitting, and then from the other building that collapsed almost like bricks or a stack of dominoes the way it fell.
Well, no matter what angle you look at it, it is just a horrendous attack. TV stayed on all around the city, and life for many was far from normal. Students at Rollins College found that many classes put on hold, and instead of class turned into a place to watch history unfold.
Local 6 reporter Michelle Cimino was there and has more.
All non-essential personnel have been told to leave.
Class at Rollins College is far from usual.
Planes were hijacked and then flown directly into each of the 2 towers.
Political science professor Rick Fogelson has decided to put assignments on hold and allow his class to learn from what's happening live.
So our government seems to be paralyzed. Pentagon is supposed to be the nerve center in a moment like this, but it's been attacked and its protection has been breached.
Explaining what the students are watching is difficult, and many are visibly shaken.
I can't believe it's happening. It's like a nightmare.
I was there on Sunday, I flew out of Newark.
Meredith Gallo is from New York and grateful most of her family is fine, but she still must wait to hear from others trapped in Manhattan. Expressing her feelings about this tragedy is not easy for her.
I just think it's a terrible tragedy. It's a terrible loss for everybody. I mean, everybody on the plane, I can't even imagine what they were going through when it was hijacked.
Class at Rollins ends on a quiet note. Most left speechless, waiting for more information. Michelle Cimino, Local 6.
Universities all across Florida shut down around noon today under orders from the state, including the largest university in Central Florida, UCF. The normally busy university with more than 30,000 students turned into a ghost town, if you will. Only a small number of students were seen walking around campus, and all but the essential staff were sent home. University officials say they do not feel the school is at risk, so they have not forced students to leave the campus, and all the dorms are open. They say they are simply in a state of shock.
Those things stay in operation and remain so that students do have a place to go under trying circumstances, the circumstances of shock and disbelief.
I think it's good. I think that as a community, I think that it's time for us to take time to reflect on humanity and time to reflect on what's happened in general with everything as a whole as our country, because a lot.
Governor Jeb Bush says right now he expects all universities to reopen tomorrow.
Classes at local schools went on as scheduled today, but not without fear and questions and, of course, on high alert. Jackie Calloway has the story from Princeton Elementary.
The superintendent of Orange County Schools outlined his plan behind 2 goals. They involve the 150,000 students who attend Orlando area schools.
First, for the safety of all the children, there are charges, and secondly, to minimize any chaos or confusion that may come from this incident.
Keeping the kids safe while limiting chaos meant leaving classrooms open, but under heightened security.
If we see visitors on campus that are not identified with a badge or a visitor badge, that we escort them to the office.
Thousands of parents decided against allowing children to spend their day in someone else's care.
We're just getting the kids, and I think they just want to have them with them, and that's okay.
At Princeton Elementary, somewhere around 100 mom and dads check their kids out early.
It's the reminder of what you don't think is ever going to happen is going to happen, and it just makes you want to hold your kids close.
In Orange County, Jackie Calloway, Local 6.
With 4 planes hijacked at once today, practically all flights in the U.S. have been grounded until further notice. No one in or out. Of course, we heard from Mike DeForest earlier, who was at the airport, who said that the situation they expected possibly